Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, the European Union is imposing more sanctions on Russia, targeting Moscow's aluminium and oil exports, while agreeing to provide fresh aid to Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron has met US President Donald Trump in Washington, becoming the first European leader to visit the White House since Trump's election win. And continued violence has killed around 7,000 people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo since January. We begin with Europe. The European Union is imposing more sanctions on Russia, targeting Moscow's aluminium and oil exports. This comes as European foreign ministers convened in Brussels, while senior EU officials travelled to Kyiv to mark the third anniversary of the Ukraine conflict. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also mentioned that Ukraine will receive €3.5 billion from the EU next month. William Denslow reports from the Belgian capital.
In a show of support, Ukrainian flags are flying alongside those of the European Union outside the EU's major institutions here in Brussels. Along with words and gestures showing support for Ukraine, European officials are pledging action too. The bloc's set to provide Kyiv with more than $3.6 billion in financial support next month. This is in addition to the roughly $145 billion in military, humanitarian and economic assistance provided over the past 3 years. EU member states have also signed off on a 16th round of Russian sanctions. Officials say the new measures aim to prevent Russia from circumventing existing sanctions on oil exports, to weaken Moscow's military operations in Ukraine. Also included in the package are restrictions on gaming controllers used to operate drones and a ban on the import of raw aluminium. Sanctions were just one of the issues being discussed at Monday's gathering of EU foreign ministers. On a visit to Kyiv, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen pledged unflinching support for Ukraine.
It is not only the destiny of Ukraine that is at stake, it is Europe's destiny that is at stake. So our first priority remains to empower Ukraine's resistance.
Pressure is building on Ukraine's European allies to take bolder action. The Trump administration has called on its transatlantic partners to step up assistance for Ukraine and boost defence spending. Europe's collective security is not being discussed at this gathering of foreign ministers, but an emergency summit of EU leaders has been scheduled for March 6th. A Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson was dismissive of the EU's response, stating on social media that their actions are not working, while in Western Europe, things are getting worse. Senior EU officials, meanwhile, say their support for Kyiv will remain resolute. Commission President von der Leyen has pledged to present a comprehensive plan at the March meeting to beef up the bloc's defence capabilities and military production, while also scaling up Ukraine's defence industry.
That was William Denslow in Brussels. French President Emmanuel Macron has met US President Donald Trump in Washington. Trump expressed hope that the conflict in Ukraine is nearing its end. But Macron cautioned that any agreement with Moscow should not amount to a surrender for Ukraine. The French president is the first European leader to visit the US since Trump's return to the White House. Nathan King has the details.
French President Macron knows Donald Trump very well. They've got on very well. Macron, one of the few leaders left after first Trump term, and even though they're amiable in front of each other, they really are at opposite ends when it comes to the situation over Ukraine. It was quite an amazing moment in the Oval Office when Trump was saying the Europeans had only lent money to the Ukrainians, the US had given money. He got the numbers wrong, vastly inflated again. And Macron actually interrupted and said, no, like you, we've done a mixture of everything. Let's take a listen.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear.
And remember, Macron was the leader of Europe that convened that emergency meeting of leaders just days after the Munich Security Conference, after comments from the new US Secretary of Defense, the Vice President of the United States, and others, and they've all talked about Europe having to step up for its security, very much knowing that Trump administration not only is looking to end the conflict over Ukraine, but also reimagine the post-World War II security architecture of Europe, which could include NATO as well. Obviously, behind the scenes, some buzzwords, and we haven't even talked about tariffs and other contentious things between Paris and Washington. Remember, there's going to be another visit later here in the week from the UK's Keir Starmer, who has become the first European leader to say that he would potentially put troops on the ground or nearby in Ukraine if there was a peace deal. We're talking about some sort of reassurance force at the moment, but they said they needed American backing. And I can tell you at the moment that is far from guaranteed. One more piece of news is that Donald Trump indicated that there may be a deal between Kyiv and the US when it comes to critical minerals and their development in Ukraine, with the suggestion that even Volodymyr Zelensky could be here at the White House over the coming days. But as with everything in this administration, subject to change.
That was Nathan King on a meeting between Macron and Trump in Washington. Turning to Germany, Friedrich Merz is on track to become the country's next chancellor after his Conservative Party won the most votes in the recent national election. But his victory has come amid a strong showing by German far-right and far-left parties. Natalie Carney explains.
With the highest number of ballots cast since unification in 1990, Germans were eager to exercise their democratic right, and those votes showed that Germans are ready for change. The country's centre-right Christian Democratic Union and their Bavarian partner, the Christian Social Union, came out on top with 28.5%. Known as the Union, the CDU and CSU intend to be tough on migration and on social welfare programs, with Merz vowing to turn Germany into Europe's leading power again.
This election campaign was really necessary, with big debates on important issues of our country, including the economy, migration, foreign and security policy and internal security. But now we must talk to each other, and the most important thing is to re-establish a viable government in Germany.
The far-right Alternative for Deutschland is also determined to change the way things are, and many voters agree, giving them 20.8% of the votes, nearly doubling their seats in the parliament. Meanwhile, caretaker Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his centre-left Social Democrats saw a sharp drop in support, winning just a little more than 16%. Yet, with the CDU-CSU having not won a majority, the SPD could find themselves still in the government as a junior partner to the Union in another grand coalition.
Here in Bavaria, the Christian Social Union, or CSU, run as the CDU's state partner. Having brought in over 37% of Bavarian votes, not only helped boost the CDU federally, it also makes the CSU a very influential partner in the composition of the next federal government.
Having brought in the most votes, it's now up to the Union to negotiate a new coalition government, one that will not face the same roadblocks as the previous one did.
That was Natalie Carney in Munich. In the Middle East, Israeli tanks continue to move into the West Bank, the first such deployment since 2002. The Israeli defense minister says the month-long sweep for Palestinian militants in the northern West Bank could continue for a year. The Israeli push there comes as tensions rise over a fragile truce deal in Gaza. Jonathan Regev reports from Tel Aviv.
I think it shows that Israel is willing and wishing for a stronger and longer campaign in the West Bank than it did in the past. It's been nearly 20 years or so since we've seen tanks in that area, and now Israel is signaling that it is preparing for a longer stay. It was also echoed by the comments of Defense Minister Israel Katz, saying that Israel intends to stay at the Jenin refugee camp and the Nur Shams refugee camp for months and months to come, even a year. And basically the people there are displaced and they cannot come back to the refugee camps for quite some time. The tanks are also sending the same message. The Israeli army is intending to stay there for quite some time. Israel is extremely worried about the rise of militant activity in the West Bank, and these actions by Israel are showing the fact that Israel is intending to counteract that with great force and for quite some time.
That was Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. The Chinese government has provided Gaza with emergency humanitarian aid through Jordan. The initial shipment, including 12,000 food parcels, has arrived. Rami Amagari reports from Gaza.
It is the first batch of the Chinese aid provided by the government of China and the people of China to the Palestinian people here in the Gaza Strip. These aids are very helpful for the Palestinians who have been going through difficult and hard conditions because of the war and the displacement that has been an outcome of that devastating Israeli war on the Gaza Strip for the past 16 months. Now the people here in Gaza City, for example, which is one of the locations where these aid have been stockpiled and have been put for the distribution on the locals who have been going through these hard conditions during the time period of the war. Majority of the people here in the Gaza Strip live out in tents because of the devastation of their homes that have been battered and destroyed by the Israeli war, the Israeli army's machineries throughout the past period of time. 70% of homes in the Gaza Strip in general have been either completely or partially destroyed, constituting about 260,000 housing units across the whole Gaza Strip. These aids are very important and include food items that have been lacking or short in the territory because of the war.
That was Rami Amagari in Gaza. Finally, in Africa, continued violence has killed around 7,000 people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo since January. In the east of the country, the M23 rebel group has captured the cities of Goma and Bukavu and closed camps for internally displaced people. About 40,000 people have fled to neighboring Burundi for safety. The United Nations has warned that the worsening security situation could spill over into a wider region. Meanwhile, President Felix Tshisekedi has called the conflict in his country an economic war. Chris Okumringa reports from Kinshasa.
When this conflict escalated in January, there were about tens of thousands of people who were displaced living on the outskirts of Goma, the capital of North Kivu province. And so these people had to flee after fighting broke out between the M23 rebels, government forces, and their allied militia, the Wazalendo. Some of them remained in some of those camps, but they were ordered to leave the camps. The camps were broken up by the rebels. They were told to go back to their villages. Some of these people were elderly, children, women, so it was very difficult for them, and especially for aid agencies, because these people were now scattered around North Kivu provinces, areas that have been controlled by the rebels. Some of the routes to those areas are very hard to reach. So these humanitarian organizations have been saying it has become very difficult for them. And also the airport in Goma was shut down by the rebels. This is an area where a lot of the food and other humanitarian relief items have been coming into the city. So it has become very tough for them to support these people who are in dire need of food, water, and medicine. President Felix Tshisekedi has repeatedly been saying that this war in Eastern DRC is an economic one. It's not one that has been, brought about by the discrimination, persecution, or marginalization of the Congolese Tutsis in Eastern DRC, as people like the officials of M23 and the Rwandan government has been saying. So he has been saying that a lot of the minerals in Eastern DRC, in areas that have been captured by the rebels, are being illegally exploited and taken to Rwanda, sold abroad as Rwandan minerals. So he wants the United States, the European Union, and other international countries out there to come and deal directly with the DRC. The president said that he's going to start meeting with political leaders this week to come up with this government of national unity.
That was Chris Okumringa on the hostilities in the eastern DRC. Now, a reminder of the headlines before we go. The European Union is imposing more sanctions on Russia, targeting Moscow's aluminium and oil exports. French President Emmanuel Macron has met US President Donald Trump in Washington. He was the first European leader to visit the White House since Trump's election win. And continued violence has killed around 7,000 people in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo since January. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thanks for listening.